Last week you heard all the news about Intel's new 12th gen Alder Lake processors. I went through Intel's news. I also went through press kits from Gigabyte, Asus and MSI. Today, finally, we have reached the launch review of this Core i9-12900K, which is in this MSI Z690 Unify motherboard. Before I get down to brass tacks about performance, power, heat and all the rest of that good stuff, and we have plenty of charts to work through, I'm going to give you a very brief recap of the previous news, just in case you haven't been avidly watching all our videos. I'm quite sure Alan's going to put timestamps below this video like usual, in which case you'll be able to skip ahead to my testing and conclusions if you feel the urge, or you can remain for the long haul and hear every single last thought I have on the subject. The key highlights of the new 12th gen processors: they support PCI Express Gen 5 with up to 20 lanes of PCI Express from the CPU, and we have DDR5 memory support. We also have support for DDR4. Processor can turbo boost up to 5.2 GHz provided you're running with a Z690 chipset. We have a new socket for the processor, LGA 1700. 12th gen uses performance hybrid architecture, or as we're all calling it, Big Little. And Intel has a new fabrication process, Intel 7, which is an enhanced version of their 10 nanometer. Nonetheless, we've got away from 14 nanometer on the desktop, and we have a combination of P-core and E-core. At launch, there are 6 processors: Core i9-12900K and KF, Core i7-12700K and KF, Core i5-12600K and KF. We can see the processor core counts. Intel turbo frequency isn't really of much interest because that's a momentary thing, but you will note slightly slower than previous gens. Turbo boost max technology 3.0 on the Core i9, Core i7. Again, slightly slower than previously. And we have figures for cache and also for TDP. More on that very soon. Intel's big claim, world's best gaming processor. We're going to get into that. Best overclocking experience, we're going to get into that. Intel's performance hybrid architecture and Intel Thread Director. Thread Director is hardware within the processor that talks to Windows 11 to tell it what the heck to do with these two different kinds of CPU core. Biggest architectural shift in a decade. Sure thing, as I said previously, I think it's more than a decade, but let's not split hairs. Intel Thread Director. So this is what they tell us, and they've told us nothing more than this. It does something clever. We haven't got the first idea how. We don't know whether there'll be different versions of Thread Director in future processors or how they'll be named. It's a black box. First in platform innovation, 16 lanes PCI Express Gen 5. Sure thing. We haven't got any Gen 5 gadgets at the moment. They don't exist, not till probably middle of next year. Why performance hybrid? I went over this chart previously, but didn't really lean on the fact that this chart is really showing more threads is better. And the fact is, Intel's previous processors, as they must now be called, the 14 nanometer on 10th and 11th gen, horribly inefficient. Intel is claiming the new 12th gen much more efficient. Power definition updates. PL1 equals PL2 equals 241 watts. Wave goodbye to the previous turbo boosts and tau. Improvements to the thermal package. Basically, this time round, they've thinned the solder. We shall see how that helps thermals. New overclocking opportunities with 12th gen Intel Core. I'll be looking at overclocking. And then with the Z690, your K-SKU processor is fully unlocked. Intel Extreme Tuning Utility 7.5, we'll be taking a look at that, and also the Intel Speed Optimizer. And now we're all caught up with what Intel 12th Gen is all about. Let's get the Core i9-12900K up and running. The hardware I'm using for this review of my Core i9-12900K, motherboard MSI Meg Z690 Unify. Got the Unify out of the box, gave it a run, one BIOS update, and it's behaved absolutely solidly. In the event it had let me down, because with a new platform, who knows, I could have switched to the Gigabyte Z690 Master or indeed the Asus ROG Hero. Had no need. I'll get to those boards over the next week or two anyway, but for now, it's Unify. The DDR5 memory is this kit here of Corsair Vengeance DDR5 32 gigabytes of 5200 mega transfer memory. I also have this Kingston Fury kit which came with the Asus press kit and some G-Skill Ripjaws memory. and we have more G.Skill memory on the way. So no doubt we'll get down to doing a DDR5 roundup. The Corsair Vengeance has behaved itself during this testing, and as we're working with new technologies, reliability and repeatability is what we need in the first instance. SSD, Sabrent Rocket 4.0, Gen 4 Phison controller. Again, tried and true. And then when it comes to cooling, I'm using this Corsair H150i Elite LCD, which has LGA 1700 mounts built in. Luke has the same cooler. We also both have RTX 3080 graphics. Luke is currently working with a couple of the Asus boards you saw last week, the Strix and the Tough Gaming D4. And he's doing a comparison of DDR5 versus DDR4 to see whether Intel 12th Gen works better or worse on one memory or the other. The thing is, the expectation is brand new memory tends to be unreliable and slow. It's always been this way. If DDR5 is better than the good DDR4 at the moment, I'll be truly astounded. But I've been doing my testing with DDR5 and that's what you're going to see. Also, I've been doing my testing on Windows 11. This caused some soul searching. Obviously, the installed base at the moment is Windows 10. Very few people have Windows 11. My own personal PC this morning popped up with a click the button to install Windows 11 if you want. I did not do it. I will be doing it. I shall be doing it, but not right now. The thing is, Intel tells us that Thread Director requires Windows 11. Also, Windows 11 is a free upgrade from Windows 10. So why wouldn't you go for it? Which is a reasonable point. We've split the chores of testing for this launch review. So I've been testing Intel processors, Luke has been testing Ryzen 5000 processors, which is why we needed very similar hardware to make sure our figures all chime together. And we have both noted that Windows 11 appears to have a performance hit over Windows 10. In particular, memory latency, there's a significant difference. Luke will undeniably and undoubtedly cover this in more detail when he does his DDR5, DDR4 comparison. So at the moment, if you have AMD hardware and you're running Windows 10, I would not rush to update to Windows 11 if I was you. If you're running Intel hardware with Windows 10, it might be a slightly different story. On the other hand, if you're going to 12th gen Intel, Windows 11 is, as you will see, is a necessity, and that's all there is to it. Obviously, when laptops come out in the near future with 12th gen Alder Lake, they will obviously come with Windows 11 installed, so you won't have any choice in the matter. So I've used Windows 11. And there's a particular reason which I'll come to when I show you one of the test results I got, which showed that 12th gen on Windows 10, whilst in the main it performs actually very well, there are occasions it just falls to pieces. So Windows 11 all the way. Power supply is a Seasonic Prime Titanium 850 watt. Apply some Arctic thermal compound. Bring in the Corsair cooler. And lock it down, and then the top cover with the LCD screen simply drops into place. Let's take a quick look around the BIOS of this brand new platform. So far, so familiar. XMP, you'll note we've got 1, 2, 3 profiles, albeit only one is actually used, and we've got 2 user profiles. This is XMP 3.0. And now we've engaged XMP. Overclock settings. Look at this. We've got P cores and we've got E cores. Advanced CPU configuration. And we can control how many active P cores and E cores we have. The Core i9 has 8 of each, and you will note that we can disable up to 7 of them. So we could have 1 active P core or 1 active E core. You can't turn off either chunk of the processor in its entirety, but we can disable parts of it, and I have done that, and this has given us the opportunity to study what this processor does. We can see the CPU cooler tuning, which is an MSI feature, allows us to select the power limit based on the kind of cooler we have. This is something we've seen in 10th and 11th gen Intel motherboards. So a box cooler, i.e. an air tower, 241 watts, which is stock Intel settings. Tower air cooler, so proper Noctua kind of cooler perhaps, 288 watts. Water cooler, 4096 watts, over 4000 watts, and that's what we've been using for testing. So unlimited power. In Blender, what does this processor look like when it's running? Minimize that screen in. You can actually see. And you will see we've got P cores and we've got E cores. The P cores are running at 4.9 gigahertz, the E cores at 3.7 gigahertz. And notably, they're all working flat out together. Also worth pointing out, it's pulling 240 watts CPU package and 370 watts at the wall socket. So 240 watts, which is, even though we have unlimited power, bang in line with Intel's 241 watts. And the speed is maintained. Intel Extreme Tuning Utility, this is version 7.5, 7.5.3.3 to be pedantic. If we look at Speed Optimizer, it's a one-click overclock. And it increases the speed of the P cores from 4.9 to 5.0 gigahertz. And with that tiny overclock set, we see that the P cores are running at 5 gigahertz, so plus 100 megahertz. The E cores are running at 4 gigahertz plus 300 megahertz. And now the P cores are running at 100 Celsius. The package is at 100 Celsius. CPU package power is 289 watts. Which is familiar because that's the kind of power we used to see with the previous generation 8 and 10 core processors. So 100 Celsius after we used Intel's XTU to perform a very small overclock. Shut that down. It's too painful. You saw Intel's claims about Core i9-12900K, and bold claims they were too, and you've had a very brief glimpse of the processor actually working away. So now let's dive into the test charts and show you what is actually going on when we start giving it some work to do. We're going to start with Handbrake. This is the test that convinced me to use Windows 11 rather than Windows 10, and you'll see that this processor on Windows 10 doing an H.264 conversion was running at 42.9 FPS, way down the bottom of the charts. On Windows 11, if you look up the top of the same chart, basically 3 times as fast. This is proof positive that Core i9-12900K on Windows 11 and or with software that understands what to do with the processor does a very fine job. On the other hand, when there's confusion, it's just disastrous. In 7-zip compressing, you'll see the Ryzen 9 5950X is at the top of the charts, closely followed by the Core i9-12900K. And then going down, we have the 12-core Ryzen 9, then the new Core i7, old Core i7, 8-core Ryzen. This test demonstrates how grunt is what counts, almost irrespective of the age of the processor. In 7-zip decompressing, the 16-core Ryzen at the top, followed by the 12-core Ryzen, and then the new Intel Core i9, followed by AMD Ryzen 8-core. Intel asked us to give a number of benchmarks a go, and some of the benchmarks were completely unfamiliar. So in the spirit of inquiry, I've tried Bapco Crossmark. As you can see in this chart, there are 4 elements to Crossmark: overall productivity, creativity and responsiveness, and as a result the chart is an absolute mess. If we strip out the constituent parts and just look at the overall score, we can see more processor and newer processor is better. But the honest truth is, at the moment, Bapco Crossmark is a black box to us. We don't understand what it does. There is an explanatory 55-page white paper about this benchmark, and I have not had a chance to read it yet. However, Bapco Crossmark, we've given it a try. These are the figures that were produced. And then we move on to Blender. And you can see at the top of the charts we have the 16-core Ryzen 9, closely followed by the new Core i9, and then the 12-core Ryzen 9, followed by the new Core i7. I showed you in the BIOS that I could disable various of the P and E cores, and I did a number of test runs in Blender with different configurations of the new Core i9. Going down the chart, you can see we've got an 8P plus 4E configuration, in other words mimicking the new Core i7. However, the Core i9 in this configuration outstrips the Core i7 quite comfortably. It suggests the Core i9 has better silicon than the Core i7. Looking further down, you can see we have a configuration of 8P plus 1E. In other words, I'm disabling all but one of the efficiency cores, and that hurts performance as you'd expect. After that, I disabled 2 of the performance cores and 4 of the efficiency cores to mimic the new Core i5. The Core i5 happily overclocks to 4.9 GHz, which was the speed the Core i9 was running at in that mode on auto, and as a result the performance is near identical. Look down towards the bottom of the chart. I also ran the Core i9 in 4P plus 4E mode just for the fun of it. Performance slowing significantly, and then right down the bottom we have 1 performance core and 8 efficiency cores, and the time is fairly poor. However, it pretty much matches the old Core i5 10600K, which wasn't a bad processor, so it's suggesting that the efficiency cores in this processor are doing a significant amount of work. In Cinebench R23, the Core i9-12900K overclocked is at the top of the charts, ahead of the mighty Ryzen 9 5950X. The Core i9 in auto mode then follows the Ryzen 9, and after that we see the new Core i7 first overclocked and then in auto. The chart for Cinebench R23 single core is topped by the overclocked Core i9 and then the overclocked Core i5, followed by the Core i9 on auto. 3D Mark Time Spy, just the CPU score. We see the new Core i9 right at the top of the chart, followed by the Core i7 and then the Core i5. That's a clean sweep for Intel. Handbrake, the H.264 conversion is topped by the new Core i9, beating the Ryzen 9 5950X by a handy margin. Handbrake H.265 conversion, Core i9 at the top, and then Core i7, and then the 16-core Ryzen. Ada 64 memory bandwidth. Bandwidth for the DDR5 processors at the top of the charts, followed by the big AMDs, then the old Intels, and then the smaller Ryzens which have a single chiplet. You appreciate we've got a mix of memories here. What we're showing is that DDR5 certainly has potential. Memory latency is pretty much the exact opposite. Right down the bottom we've got some horrible long slow latencies, and those all belong to the brand new Intels. Up the top we've got the old Intels running on DDR4. In the middle we have AMD Ryzen. And so we come to games. Remember, Intel's claiming this is king of the gaming processors. Deus Ex Mankind Divided is an old game. 1080p, and we see Intel at the top of the charts with the new Core i9, followed by the Core i7 and then the Core i5. Deus Ex at 1440p. It's a bit of a mixed bag, but if you look, the frame rates are very similar. So the fact that the i9 overclocked is right up the top and then the i9 auto is almost at the bottom doesn't really matter, although it does look a tad peculiar. Far Cry New Dawn at 1080, we've got Core i9 right up top, followed by Core i7 and then Core i5. Far Cry New Dawn at 1440, again the new Intels are right at the top. What about a new game, Far Cry 6? At 1080, it's topped by Intel Core i9, followed by Core i7, followed by Core i5. and Far Cry 6 at 1440. Again, Intel all the way. Watch Dogs Legion at 1080, Intel Core i9 at the top, followed by Core i7, followed by Core i5, and then the old Core i9 11900K. Watch Dogs Legion at 1440. Curiously, this is owned by AMD. Very strange, but look, the frame rates are really close, 90 going down to 86, 82 at the very bottom. A tiny number of frames covers the entire field, so AMD wins, but it's a really small margin. And then we do a little bit of analysis. We take our Cinebench R23 score and we divide by the cost in pounds to work out how many points do you get per pound. And look, the new Core i5's at the top, followed by the new Core i7, then the 12-core AMD Ryzen 9, and then the new Core i9. It's expensive, but it delivers a decent level of performance. Similarly, Cinebench R23, how many points do you get per watt of power? This is system power rather than CPU power. Those big beefy AMD processors, they're at the top of the charts. They deliver loads of performance, they're very efficient. Then we have Core i5, then Core i7, and then Core i9. CPU temperature in Blender. Well, there we go. If we overclock the new Core i9, as you saw, immediately it goes to 100 degrees. On auto, you're in the mid-80s. If you don't overclock the processors, they become far more manageable. It's fairly clear that Intel's delivering these processors running close to their comfortable limit. And then we come to power consumption. This is system power at the wall socket, and Intel's using far more power than AMD. It definitely looks as though the Intel 7 or revised 10 nanometer process is less efficient than TSMC's 7 nanometer. That, or Intel's new design, is not as good as AMD's current design. And so we come to the end of our review of the Core i9-12900K. Plenty of good points and plenty of things to consider. Let's start with the pros. Storming gaming performance, just as Intel promised. Good productivity performance. The processor is very close to a Ryzen 9 5950X, and that's good going. Intel's finally moved on from their 14 nanometer process. Whether you call this thing 10 nanometer superfin or Intel 7, it's no longer 14 nanometer on the desktop, so big whoops and hurrah for that. Intel's performance hybrid architecture, or big little if we're being rude, is a major change of direction for them. Of that there is absolutely no doubt. So this 12th gen, it works. It suggests, however, that 13th, 14th, 15th gens are going to be more radical. Intel now has the ability to drop new parts into their designs, relatively speaking, with ease. And it'll be interesting to see what they do as they bring in new fabrication processes. And the final pro is that Intel supports PCI Express Gen 5. Clearly, I'm taking this on faith because I can't test it. We don't have any Gen 5 gadgets as yet. And I can't honestly claim we need Gen 5. Gen 4 is blazing fast and we're barely scratching the surface with it. But we have PCI Express Gen 5 in this motherboard and processor, and that's a good thing. And then we have the cons, the negative points. Power draw is high, efficiency continues to be unimpressive. It's no longer as horrible as it has been with 10th and 11th gen, where they just hurled power at the processor to make it work well. At least now Intel is using the power and delivering performance rather than running like crazy just to attempt to keep up with the mid-range AMD processors. But still, they've got a distance to go. DDR5 is brand new, it's going to take time to improve. It seems to work okay at the minute. I'm looking forward to seeing Luke's analysis of DDR5 versus DDR4. But if we get faster DDR5 and lower latency DDR5 in, say, 6 months' time, that'll be quite impressive. The platform, it costs. So motherboards are in the realms of £400, but there are certainly more expensive boards out there. And if you go with the DDR5 board, you then need DDR5 memory. The processors themselves are not cheap, although they're not outrageous. They're that 600, 400 and 300 pounds that we're used to seeing from Intel. Add it all together, however, and you're looking at a large expenditure. Windows 10 performance is unpredictable is the word I've chosen to use. It's certainly true. You could very likely run Alder Lake 12th Gen on Windows 10 and be perfectly happy. I can well believe this could be the case. But it's clearly designed to work with Windows 11 or the other way around. And at the moment that makes it all a bit up in the air. Do you want to ditch your OS and move to an OS that at the moment has a performance overhead? I mean, it's not a very tempting proposition. But if you stick with Windows 10, you're not going to get the best out of this processor. Of that, I am absolutely certain. So you need Windows 11. And finally, there is minimal potential for overclocking with conventional cooling. We're hearing reports of people running the new Core i9 at crazy speed, 7,000 or 7 gigahertz. Also reports of people running them at 5.2 gigahertz on the performance core and over 4 gigahertz on the efficiency core. Perhaps I got unlucky with the Silicon Lottery, but this, as you saw, 100 megahertz high on the performance core, bang, into the 100 degrees Celsius and in the red. Doesn't look good, a bit of a shame really. Overall, it's an 8 out of 10. You should seriously consider it, but it's not a must-have. Neither, however, is it a disaster. So, interesting. It's finally here. We finally have Intel 12th Gen with their new architecture and their new process.